Hello, hello.
Hello.
How's it going, guys?
Uh, Pretty good. I haven't
So,
been able to practice that much in the last
ah,
3 weeks because exams and stuff.
mhm.
But
So
try my
do
best.
do you remember what it was that we talked about last time?
Yes,
Okay, what was it?
it was the plane parallel spacing, uh, spacing with the ranges. Then there
Hmm.
was the clicking with auto attacks and animation canceling,
Hmm.
clean auto attacks,
Hmm.
and the what do you call it? Camera position on the character in the lane.
Mm, right.
I think
And
that was
also,
most of it.
wasn't there also T formation when someone is up forward, two people can go on one person at a time.
Hmm. Yeah, there was that. And then one of the other things that I thought was kind of important was the like if one of you is looking to go in, right? There's the like I'm looking or I'm going communication that you can
Oh,
use a voice
oh
call,
yeah.
right? That's another big one.
We, I guess we've been trying to do that. When we do play.
Right. So, how have all of those things been going? Have you seen any kind of changes with the amount of practice that you've been able to put in?
I feel like we talk more about what we're gonna
We,
do when we play,
yeah,
which
That's really
has
good.
made the biggest difference.
we went like I don't, it's very rare for us to lose lane. We when we
Really?
do it together. Well, well,
Was that
what
true
I've
before?
found is Um, no, I we lost lane quite a few times previously.
We
I
wouldn't
guess
lose, but just not win.
Yeah, you'd
yeah,
kind of like go even or
I don't know.
something.
Yeah,
yeah,
we just do nothing.
Uh huh. And now you feel like you're like winning every time.
90%, 90, 70,
Wow,
80.
that is
A
that is
lot.
an enormous
But
difference.
we don't play that much. Play.
But you don't play that much.
yeah.
Understandable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do probably due to the effect of exams.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Makes sense. Okay, so uh, if that is the case, I totally was not expecting for that to make such a big difference for you. If that is the case and laning phase kind of no longer feel like okay, so here's the question: Are you actually winning every game now, or is it just you're winning every lane and games are still sometimes kind of tough?
Uh, hmm. I feel like there are still some laning phases where we int. I don't know.
Okay, so which would you guys prefer to focus on? Do you want to talk about laning phase, or do you want to talk about like post lane and macro and stuff like that?
uh,
I don't really mind. It's up to James.
I would prefer post macro because uh, like
Okay,
even
sure.
when I'm not doing and
Hmm.
coming out of lane, but like making my ADC positive, I'm positive. I'll still end up losing the game purely because I don't know, top
Sure.
fed super hard or mid fed super hard, and learning better macro I think would help.
Awesome. Okay. So definitely we can talk about that. So it's really unfortunate because the website that I usually use to talk about this is down. But we will do our best with what we can. So I will go ahead and bring up a Rift kit and we'll do this from scratch. So I'll go ahead and send you this link. Go ahead and join this. That will let you see what it is that I'm talking about. are in there.
I'm in.
Great. And if I draw, you can see this, yeah?
No, I can't.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and follow my own link. See how that does. Yes, join session. So at this point, if I draw, can we see it? This is interesting because it doesn't appear to be... Oh god. Oh god, I accidentally started those. No! It's a disaster.
See you next time.
Alright. Goodbye to that. Okay, well, in the event that this is not working, I'll go ahead and just screen share it, and that'll definitely work. So you can all see the screen, and you should now be able to see what it is that I'm drawing, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. So so when I think about macro, right, I think really kind of the basic idea, of course, is always that you're trying to kill the Nexus, right? And in order to kill the Nexus, you have to kill 5 towers and an inhibitor at minimum, right? So the key question of macro is essentially like how as a team can we take towers effectively, right? And there are a couple of different ways that a couple of different strategies that I think make sense for trying to take towers. Sorry, I got something stuck in my throat. I like to kind of think of the game as composed of 4 major win conditions, right? There's win conditions for which you're grouped, and win conditions for which you're ungrouped. There's win conditions that involve taking towers directly, and win conditions that involve kind of more relying on killing people and then taking towers, right? And this kind of creates a little matrix here, right? So when we think about grouping and taking towers together, what does that sound like to you, right? If you had to think of all people talk about win conditions. If you've heard of that before, is there a particular win condition that sounds like it would be grouping and taking towers together?
Yeah, it's siege.
Yes, exactly, sieging. And if we think about taking towers while split up, right? What would we call that?
Split push.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Nice.
So split pushing.
1-3-1.
Yeah, 1-3-1, 1-4, and any kind of plan where somebody, in a side lane, with relatively low numbers, is really kind of the pressure point for the team, and they're the one that's actually going to be taking the towers, right? And at this point, I'll note too, you can split push and not intend to take towers whatsoever. Right? When people define split pushing as just going to a side lane and shoving the wave, right? Then you can have all sorts of you can have a Malphite that split pushes, right? But the Malphite very rarely is going to be taking the tower in the split push. You know what I mean? Unless nobody comes to stop him, right? He's not going to be winning 1v1s in the side lanes. He's not going to be drawing 2 people to him, right? His main goal is to draw 1 person to him and then teleport in and then start the team fight, right? And then winning the team fight is how your team actually then gets the towers, right? So I'm getting ahead of myself. Killing people as a group, right? That's team fighting, right?
Yeah.
And then when we talk about killing people while split up, we can call that skirmishing, or we can call that picks, right? And I will posit that these are actually, in some ways, kind of the only ways that you can actually take towers, And By that I mean that any kind of strategy that you can think of that involves like taking towers is roughly going to fall into one of these bins, right? People will talk about like wonky exceptions, things like, okay, I'm just gonna rotate around the map with Bard really fast so that we're always like showing up to the tower first and we can like take it down that way, right? And it's like, well, I mean, it's kind of like a siege and it's kind of like a split push, so this is the framework that I use to kind of understand all the different things that are going on here. So so this is great. Now we've got like 4 different ways that we can take towers. How does that help us figure out what to do? So the key thing to realize is every champion has a kit. Every kit gives them certain abilities, and each ability that somebody might have is going to be useful in some situations and not that useful in others, right? And if you know what situations your kit is useful in, and the kits of your teammates, then you can start to say, okay, if we do this lane assignment, what are our chances of success? How effective are we at doing this, And does it seem like we'll actually be able to take towers doing it, right? So I think at this point it's best to actually just go with an example. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my OPGG. Don't look too hard at the win-loss, but that's okay. And we'll just take this as 2 team compositions, and we can kind of talk about each of these in terms of their win conditions and kind of go from there. So when we look at my team composition, right, we've got like Nasus, Echo, Ahri, Ashe, and Zillion. So just intuitively, without doing any analysis, what would you guess would be the most appropriate win condition for this composition? What's your guess?
Either split push or skirmish. Mini split push.
Okay. And what's your reason for that? What are you looking at that tells you that that's true?
Well, I just know that Nasus struggles to get around the map, so it's easy to stick him in a lane for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Nasus
he gets really big.
Generally a good split pusher.
Requires people to stop him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then what about skirmishing or picks? Was that just also because Nasus is generally a side?
Well, yeah, but I feel like
Echo can burst really quick with Ahri.
Ahri
can look for picks,
but
but also like looking on the enemy team, like fighting a Leona Talon, I think would be quite scary with their team being much more team fight focused.
Yeah. So already you have some intuitions about kind of what champions are good at what things. So and you have a notion too that there's like properties involved, that it's not just abilities, it's actually like it's like what the ability does. You know what I mean? It's like Echo's full combo and Ahri's full combo are both burst damage, right? And you use the term burst damage when talking about picks, right? And I think that's really telling, right? When you look at how good are we going to be at different win conditions, a lot of it is like each of these win conditions kind of has like it's almost like it's got like several like slots of like things that you need, right? And maybe like one of these is like burst, right? Maybe one of these is like CC, right? And several others, right? And how many of those properties your team can actually like fulfill is in some ways like pretty much how good they are at actually excelling in that situation. Because when you are looking for picks, right, you're split up looking for kills, right? Generally you're going to be moving around in the enemy jungle and trying to find people that are isolated, and then burst them out really hard so that they die before the team even has a chance to react. And now you have like a good numbers advantage that you can start working with to either immediately go take a tower or go take an objective, something like that. So here's what I want to do is I want to talk about what are the different properties that are useful to have for each win condition. Okay, so I'll go ahead and pull up. No, I don't need OneNote. That's too high. Too insane. Let's just use a sticky note. I think I can. Can I turn up the font size? I don't know. Anyway, so can I? Doesn't look like I can. Okay, I will use OneNote. Apologies for the delay here. Just trying to find a way that we can look at this together in a reasonable way. So now I can turn this up to like, or actually I can just use it again. Right. Yeah. So is that big enough? Can we see that through the screen share? I know sometimes it can be kind of sketchy.
Yeah, I might just need to rejoin because it's very blurry.
Very blurry? Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Add to dictionary. Split pushing is a word. Don't give me that. Are we back?
Yep, sorry, I'm back.
Okay. And can you see the text? Is it large enough and unblurry enough?
I can see it kind of.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess that's
Luke,
what we'll go with.
If it just doesn't work, just watch the stream.
Yeah, you can watch. Yeah. It'll be a little slower. It'll be a little slower, but hopefully it'll be.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we're talking about split pushing, what properties of a champion make them good at split pushing, in your opinion?
Wave clear, ability to
Yes.
take tower.
Okay.
Fiora can more powers, I guess.
And also hard 1v1 strength, like for people who try to bat or slow you down.
Mm-hmm.
Or if they don't have that, some ability to get away. At least.
Like TP, or
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, alternately a way to escape. Exactly. So these are definitely all really, really excellent, really, really important properties. Now, I'm going to ask you a question that I don't think many people think about. What properties do you want in the rest of your team in order to support a split pusher?
Well, I feel like in the example of your game, you had like a global ultimate, which helps a lot. Like Ashe, you had the Ashe.
Definitely. Yeah, if you have a global ult that can kind of, again, it's like the idea of they send potentially multiple people to stop your split pusher because, they can win the 1v1 or they can chip tower in the 1v1. And then you have a global ultimate that allows you to assist them in that side lane. Suddenly they're that much more powerful. Yeah, absolutely. Global ults are a really, really, really big thing for split pushing win conditions. Can you think of anything else that's important?
Someone who can force a fight or create picks in like a 2v2 skirmish while someone is split pushing, I guess.
Yeah, like
Like
people who
mortars
are
or
good at picking. Absolutely. Because they can, yeah, exactly. People are going to start trying to rotate to the split pusher,
yeah.
and then if you have somebody that makes that difficult by having a good pick threat, then that can be really good, you know. So like pick split push can kind of work together, right? And in fact, they actually have to work together, right?
Yeah.
But you can see how when you're thinking about win conditions, it's kind of similar to what I was talking about with like the like Malphite doing the split push, right? You know, you can have a position where, you know, there's some people looking to pick and some people looking to split push, but either one of them can kind of end up being kind of more of the like focus of the play. You know what I mean? If you have a really fed Echo, you might send a mediocre Nasus into a side lane because at some point somebody has to respond to him, and then that gives Echo the opportunity to pick, right? But you might also send a mediocre Echo to protect a really fed Nasus in the side lane and just make sure that they can't really gang up on him as much as they'd like to, and you know, force skirmishes to happen. And you know, I would call the first one playing for picks because the like pick is like the point of pressure. And in the second case, when the Nasus is fed, I would call that more of split pushing, right? Because the assumption is that the Nasus is the one that's actually going to be taking the towers, and the Echo is just there to protect them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we've talked about split pushing. Let's go ahead and talk about another one. So let's talk about speaking of picks, right? Let's talk about picks, right? So what makes a champion good for making picks? You already mentioned burst damage. Can you think of any other properties that are good for it?
CC.
Yeah, crowd control. Why is that? What does crowd control do for you?
It allows the rest of the team to follow. It stops the
Yeah.
person where they are, so they can't run away.
Yeah. Are there any? Is there any like substitute for having crowd control? Is there anything else that can kind of do the same thing?
Gap
I guess
closes.
you're tanky.
Yeah. No, gap closers, I think, is what I'm kind of looking for, right? Because if, you know, it's like you can either keep them here with you, or you can chase them
Or you
wherever
just-
that it is that they go,
Yeah.
right? So gap closers / mobility, right, is another thing that can really help, right? Can you think of any other properties that are good, that are important for pick champions?
Not gonna lie, I can't exactly think of.
I would
An easy
argue,
escape.
yeah, again, kind of that whole sort of mobility thing, gap closers.
Yeah.
I think it's the same sort of thing. I think global ults again are really nice for picks because again, right, generally you're going to need to have people kind of, you know, split up and you're going to have like a 1-4 or 1-3-1 kind of like a lane assignment. You know, sometimes you can get like even a 2-2-1, right? And you know, picks can very easily turn into skirmishes, right? So if somebody has a global ult or you know, really long range mobility, that kind of helps them to potentially join a fight that's already in progress from like further away, right? So you know, you look at somebody like a TF, right? He's like pretty darn good at looking for picks, not only because he has burst damage and CC, right? but because his gap closing ability is global range, right? Shen is really really good. Gangplank is really really good. All of them, Ash, etc. So that's kind of that whole side of things. Now let's think about team fighting. So, what kinds of properties do you need to team fight well?
Still AoE.
Sure, AoE. If there's a whole bunch of people there and you can hit all of them, massive value. Really, really, really good. What else?
Well, I guess it falls under the same thing as AoE, but like lots of CC, like for focusing specific champions in a team fight. So
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you don't have CC as a team fighting team, it's often pretty difficult to actually make the fight happen at all, right? If you win the fight and you know it and they know it, why are they going to stick around, right? They're going to leave. And so you want the crowd control to prevent them from leaving, right? And in the same kind of way, right, we can think about mobility being reasonable in team fighting, but I'll note that generally mobility is less powerful in team fights than in skirmishes. Why do you think that is?
Could you repeat that?
So I will assert that mobility is less powerful than crowd control in team fighting settings. And I'm asking, do you agree? And if so, why? What makes that true?
I feel like it depends a lot on the team comp, because some champions' mobilities is like helps a lot, like Israel E helps a lot in team fights to reposition and stuff.
Okay, so what function is that serving in the team fight? Is it keeping him in range of people?
Can do a lot.
I would say out of range to avoid being the focus.
CC. Oh.
So now we kind of start to realize there's actually kind of two, when we think about team fighting, there's actually kind of two different classes of champions and they need different properties, right? We have our frontliners and we have our backliners, right? And when we have a backliner, them having mobility / escapes is really important if the enemy has any threats of people who are going to dive, right? And try and bypass the front line and kill them. But when we when we think about frontliners, right? There we're generally looking for more of gap closers than escapes, right? And most mobilities can be used kind of either way. There are some that are kind of hard locked into one or the other. But for the most part, you're looking for gap closers on your frontliners because they're trying to kind of go in and keep people there. And then backliners are looking for escapes. So the reason that I would say that mobility tends to be less valuable than crowd control is if you crowd control somebody on the enemy team, your whole team benefits from the fact that they are now standing still, right? Where if you use a mobility spell, you are the only one who has moved. You know what I'm saying? I'll call out Sivarolt as an interesting exception, right? Sivarolt makes your whole team fast, so now all of you can actually stay in the fight, right? Or disengage from the fight, right? But if we look at Ezreal E-ing forward doesn't help the rest of his team stay in range or get out of range, right? Where crowd control, if you Ash ult somebody, everyone can now move up to that person, right? So that's why I say crowd control is that much more valuable in grouped situations, because multiple people can benefit from it.
What about so like often I see in pro play I see top laners specifically like Aatrox or Aurelia or very hard 1v1 like skirmish champions often flank going behind
Yes.
and leaving the team to go for 4v5 like for a bit and then be getting flanked.
Absolutely. You're quite correct. I think that's a third class of champions that can team fight. Right? It's the divers, those that are looking to, like we were talking about, right? Not really worry about killing the front line. They're just going to try to get a flank and go straight for the back line, right? This is, our things like assassins and our bruisers and, I'll say like, an Echo and or an Akali is going to play the fight similarly, to an Aatrox or an Aurelia. All of them are going to have similar positioning, maybe different timing on when they go in, but the angle that they choose is going to be pretty much the same. But yes, definitely divers are another important part of it. So when we think about divers, right? What we talked kind of about the idea of like burst damage, right? And I'll contrast that with like sustained damage, right? Which do we think is more important for a diver to have? Is it more important for them to have burst, or more important for them to have sustained damage?
Burst.
Yeah,
It's a burst.
Right. Because if their target is the backliners, right, then generally doesn't really matter too much whether they can deal the most damage total. It matters whether they can deal enough to immediately delete the squishies in the back, right? So generally burst is better for divers. When we think about backliners, who are their targets generally in the fight? Who are they trying to hit?
Anyone in front of them. Like
True.
Whoever they can reach.
Anyone in front of them, which generally involves tanks, right?
Yeah.
So is it better for a backliner to have burst damage or sustained damage?
Sustain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's because, backliners tend to be usually like the only people that can actually do damage to tanks. And so if you're trying to, have a team fight and go kind of front to back, right? Then if you don't have a way to kill the enemy tanks just absorb all of the fire, and then your team kind of gets bulldozed, right? So having the sustained damage to prevent that from happening is pretty important, right? And this, I think, kind of, relatively, I'll add like mobility as like a property that like divers, are happy for. But this all kind of, makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So, finally, let's go ahead and let's talk about sieging. So, when we're thinking about sieging, what kinds of properties are we looking for that make sieging easy?
In
I think poke, sustained poke.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Poke, sustain, both really, really important. So why are those good?
Because they can keep in the lane by the tower for a long time and then push the enemies away. So they can get the free hits.
Yeah, it's like if you poke the enemy down so much that they can't even win a team fight underneath their own tower, then suddenly you just get to take the tower for free. Right?
Yeah.
And similarly, if they have poke to try to chunk you so that they can, start engaging the team fight on you, right? You have sustain to then make sure that you always kind of maintain that health lead, right? So those are really important. What are some other properties that are important for sieging?
Wave clear maybe.
Yeah, wave clear is hugely important, right? If you cannot actually get the wave into the enemy's tower, you can't siege, right? In fact, you will be getting sieged, right? Like if you're grouping next to your tower, that's not a win condition. That's awful. You're really sad. So, wave clear is absolutely key to sieging. If you don't have it, you literally can't win the game with that win condition. So, can you think of anything else, or did you have a question?
Yeah. So like, in this situation that you like identify an enemy team is mainly siege focused with their
Mhm.
comp.
Yeah.
In a situation like what kind of team I know it's like slightly going off topic a bit, but what kind of team type or comp I guess would you have to go with to counter sieging? Like, would you
Well,
preferably go to like force fights, like with team fights, or try to split push to put pressure on side lanes?
I think that you can do either. The beautiful thing about League of Legends is that although there's some amount of like rock paper scissors to win conditions, at the end of the day, who gets to execute their win condition is kind of a function of who's ahead in a lot of ways, right? If you're generally stronger than the enemy, then you can generally win fights, at like even numbers in even territory, right? And so you'll get to push out your waves first, right? And when you push out your waves first, you then get to choose where to go and kind of like where the fight is going to happen and under what terms, right? You get to choose whether the map is grouped or split. You get to choose whether you're fighting in the jungle or in the lanes, right? Or in the river. And so when we think about how do you beat a sieging composition, if you see that they're going for sieging, what are things that you can do to give yourself a good chance? I would say you identified two really good ways that you can do it, right? Picking is going to kind of have the hardest time into sieging, right? Because and this I think actually makes sense when you think about it in terms of this quadrant thing, right? When we think about this in terms of like the grouping versus splitting and like trying to like go for fight near towers or fight elsewhere, basically. You can see that sieging is trying to group at the towers, picking is trying to kill people while split in the jungle, right? So like no part of those are like overlapped, right?
Yeah.
In the same way, like team fighting and split pushing are like no parts are overlapped, right? So, but when we look at team fighting and split pushing, right? If they're trying to siege and you're trying to team fight, well, hey, both of you want to be grouped, right? And so there's that kind of overlap where, if they group to try to siege, you then get the opportunity to team fight them because they're already grouped, right? And if they try to siege, right, you can try to split push, and although it's not really like matching them in the same lane, right? I think split pushing is a really elegant way to solve sieging because when we think about kind of how numbers advantage works, so this is kind of getting into some kind of other principles, right? But at a very basic level, right? Like having a numbers advantage means you probably win a fight, right? I'll just assert that.
Yeah.
You can think of a tower as kind of like a person, kind of like a champion. It's not quite as powerful, but it's like close, right? So if your team can hold the siege 4v5, right, which is really kind of more like 4.5v5, right? And then you can have somebody in a side lane that's split pushing, right? That can be really powerful. But I will note, it all depends on who has tempo on the map, right? I'll go ahead and I'll clear this, right? But if you have, if the enemy team is already grouped in mid lane, and like your top laner is like just starting to split push, you know, like maybe like this tower is down and they need to like go for this one, and they're, you know, the wave is like here, right, and the enemy team is like already here, and they're like trying to shove out. That feels awful, right? Like 9 times out of 10,
Yeah.
they're going to take this tower before your split pusher is going to be able to get anything done, unless your wave clear is so insane that they can't get in there, right? So if you're going to try to beat sieging with split pushing, that's one of the things that you need. You need wave clear, right? We talked about why wave clear is so important for sieging. If they can't get the wave into the turret, they can't siege it, right? So if you are facing a team that's going to be trying to siege, I strongly recommend that you try to draft as much wave clear as you possibly can. Because if they can't get the wave into the tower, it's doomed for them, right? Suddenly, them having tempo in mid lane doesn't actually matter. You can just send your top laner top, you can wave clear mid infinitely for however long, and then suddenly your top laner is able to actually get at the turret and be like a pressure point. And now they need to send somebody out, right? And then now they're no longer grouped, right? You've broken their ability to group by applying side lane pressure, right? And maybe if they send somebody, you can even then send a second person, right? You know, like they send their top laner to match your top laner. Now it's a 4.5 v4 in mid. You can actually even choose to send your mid laner or somebody. You know, maybe your mid laner is your wave clear, right? Maybe it needs to be your jungler, right? You send your jungler down bottom or something, right? And now it's like a 3.5 v4, right? But now you've got another 1v0 in the bottom lane, and now the jungler starts split pushing, right? It can be really tough for them to deal with, right? Like you can incrementally break them apart with split push pressure by doing this if you have wave clear. If you don't have wave clear, you're going to be really, really out of luck. So wave clear is really important. If you are going to be trying to do it via split pushing. And then, like you mentioned too, if you can do it via team fighting. If you do it via team fighting, then I think there are two really important properties that you can have. One of them is sustain, right? Because assumably if they're going to be sieging, then they're going to be trying to poke you down. So you want to make sure that you're able to stay healthy enough that if you find an angle to engage the fight, you actually can take it. You know, if you're a 0 sustain team fighting composition against a siege composition and you get poked out, it's doomed. Now you can't win the team fight, and you can't like wave clear their siege. They just take your towers, right? And it's super one-sided. So sustain is really, really good if you're going to be team fighting. And then the other one is engage, right? If you do not actually have a way to start the team fight, generally a gap closer plus some ground control on a tank, right? Then you're going to be really out of luck, right? And this kind of brings me to one of the things that I think is really actually quite important on siege comps, which is disengage power, right? You know, think back to the last time that you played against like a Janna Varus or like a Braum Varus, right? And they like set up their camp in mid lane and they're just like whacking the tower, and you're like, I literally can't walk at them. Like, I'll just get killed, right? So the ability to disengage and to walk backwards is what counters what soft counters engage, right? And so if you have more engage than they have disengage, right, then the fight happens, right? And if you don't have more engage than they have disengage, the fight doesn't happen, right? And so you need to make sure that depending on how much disengage they draft, you need to draft excuse me, successively more and more engage to be able to make sure that the fight actually still happens, right?
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Yeah. So this, I think, covers all four, right? So now the question becomes, okay, so now that we understand, you know, like what are the different properties that champions can have, and what win conditions do those properties make them good at? Oh, I'll add one more thing for sieging, and I think this is actually kind of an important, an interesting one. So when we talk about like poke, right? Zone control is something that makes poke that much more effective, right? Like if you already have poke, then you can start drafting things like Morgana with her like puddle, and like Lux with her E, and Gragas with his barrel, that like put effects on the ground that linger there for some amount of time. And when you have the Caitlyn with her traps, right? All of these things restrict the area that the enemy can move around in, and make it that much easier to land your skill shots and actually like hit your poke, right?
Yeah.
So those are some other things that we can think about as like being really, really good. So yeah, now that we have this sense that different champions excel at different win conditions. Different win conditions require different meta abilities from champions, different properties. This kinds of allows us to identify, we can now kind of simply play out several different scenarios when we start thinking about, literally what are we going to actually try to do, right? So if we again go back to looking at these two team compositions, right? We initially said, okay, this is going to be kind of like a split push / pick kind of team composition, which makes perfect sense, right? When we think about split pushers, right? Like, Nasus can take towers really fast. His 1v1 power is like pretty darn good. And I mean, in fact, I'll even say his like 1v2 power is pretty darn good. You know what I mean? Like Nasus, once he hits a certain point, he just kind of becomes very difficult to do anything to. He's very tanky, does a lot of damage.
Yeah.
We've got the global from the Ashe. We've got Zillion, Ari, and Echo mobility that helps us kind of supportively pick and collapse on people that are trying to go for the Nasus. This is a pretty clear game plan, right? It's like we've got like 4 people looking to pick, and then Nasus looking to split, which helps the pick to helps set up the pick, right? And when we look at the enemy team composition, right, they've got Mordekaiser, Warwick, Talon, Caitlyn, Leona, right? So you mentioned that, or someone mentioned that it was it felt like a good team fighting composition. So when we think about team fighting and all of these different properties, like who on this in this composition is providing these properties? Who's doing this stuff?
I would say like Talon can provide act as the diver. Leona can act as a frontliner. Caitlyn can do backliner with good sustain, and E for escape, pushback, sort of, and then Warwick for CC is a frontliner, and Mordekaiser I would think would be pretty good. Can probably, I think, can act as a frontliner / like diver.
Yeah, he's kind of one of those like mid-liney, bruisery, I'm gonna like hit the tanks and be happy about it kind of weird champions, right? Because he does, I think he's got like % health damage or something like that. I mean, certainly if he builds the Andres, then he does good damage to tanks. But in this in this game, he doesn't even need to think about killing tanks, because we're never going to want to be frontlining. We've only got Nasus for a frontliner. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, between Mord, Warwick, and Leona, they've got like a really nice, strong frontline. And because we don't actually have that much frontline ourselves, it's kind of okay that their only sustained damage is Caitlyn, right? You can argue that Mordekaiser and Warwick and Talon all provide some small measure of sustained damage. Maybe we can count them together as like a second backliner, right? In some kind of weird way. But the fact that we only have the Nasus, in a team fighting situation means that's kind of okay, right? We've got pretty much only squishy champions, so them having, more towards kind of like the burst end of things is actually fine for the team fight. Yeah. Because sustained damage is only there so that we can kill tanks. If there are no tanks, it's perfectly fine / even better to have just more burst. When we think about AoE, right? Like Talon's got pretty darn good AoE. Leona ult can, in some situations, hit multiple people, but generally they don't have that much AoE. But They've got
More
really
does
great
a lot.
CC, right? Just like absolute bucket loads of CC. They've got the Mordekaiser pull, they've got Warwick ult and E, they've got Caitlyn traps, and they've got Leona's entire kit. So, you know, if they find somebody, dear God, that person is probably dead, right? They're going to get CC'd from 100 to 0.
Yeah.
So, I'll note, too, I actually think that they're pretty reasonable at making picks, right? Because they have all of that burst damage from the Talon and the CC from the Leona, like, that's a pretty nice picking duo. Mordekaiser putting somebody in his ultimate and saying, fight me, is another pretty awesome way to make a pick happen.
Yeah.
So, even though it's perhaps not their first choice, their ability to pick is fine. It's actually totally okay. And if they get an 18-2 Talon, suddenly that ability to pick becomes really, really relevant, because that's how Talon functions the best, right? Is by making picks. He can function as a backline diver in team fights, but he's even happier to be making picks. And so, this is a really kind of important idea with team compositions and win conditions. You can look at a team composition in Champion Select in a vacuum, and you can say these are what the composition is good at. You can go one step further and say, okay, now I'm actually in a game against the other composition. Am I better than them? Not good, but better than them at that win condition, right? And that's something that you can ask. And then as you get even further into the game and you start to see who's going to be fed and who's not, right? You can say, okay, let's emphasize the win conditions of the people on our team that are doing well, and de-emphasize the win conditions of the people on our team that aren't doing well, right? Kind of play to the person who is strong, right? So when we look at, like, our team, right, and we see that we have an incredibly fed Ashe, and then, like, mediocre power in, like, Echo and Ahri, right? Suddenly we start to realize that, actually our team fighting isn't even that terrible, Yeah. As the, with the Zillion to kind of provide front line, right? Like, we can call it kind of okay, right? With Echo, who's able to, press R, use Zanya's, right? Like, he can serve kind of the same function as somebody who's really tanky, in that he distracts the enemy backline, and or keeps them at bay for a reasonably long time, right? And that can provide the space and time for Ashe to DPS down their whole team, right? So our team, team fighting starts looking better than it initially does because Ashe gets really fed, and then for them, picking starts looking better than it typically does because Talon starts getting really fed. And so, having played this game, I can tell you that's actually what it did devolve into, right? It was like Talon, like, roaming around in their jungle looking for Ashe. Ashe desperately trying really hard not to walk into the enemy jungle and failing over and over again and getting picked over and over again. And then, eventually we had a couple of team fights and ended up winning, but it was very, very close, right? So, yeah. Any of this new? Any of this different than the way you were already thinking about it?
I think it was intuitive already. So
Okay.
this is making it more conscious, so that when we get into games, we can think about it more.
Mhm.
But I think there was, like, kind of a fundamental understanding, just not conscious about it.
Yeah.
For me, it's made it more clear and cut. Like,
Excellent.
You can identify based on the different properties that are given for each comp type.
Yeah. So let's do a couple of exercises then. Let's go ahead and I'll pull up another game, and we can look at the two team compositions. You can tell me you can tell me in a vacuum what are both teams good at, right? Like, rank the win conditions, like best to worst, right? Then I want you to tell me, what win condition should each team actually go for, assuming everybody's even, and then we'll actually look at like who's fed and talk about, now that they're fed, does that change anything? Do we shift to some other win condition? Okay? Sound like a plan?
Yeah. I just can't really make out the champions.
Yeah, let me go ahead and
That
blow this up real large.
I can
Here we go! Gigantos!
Thank you.
Okay, alright, so for team composition number 1, we've got Tryndamere, Mundo, Katarina, Xayah, and Rakan, right? So in a vacuum, what are we good at here? And why?
Chin is very good at split pushing, but
Absolutely.
I feel like the rest are kind of better with team fighting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of off. Tryndamere is kind of off theme, right?
Yeah.
If you watch LS ever, he'll talk about it in terms of like Magic the Gathering colors, actually, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah,
They'll say they're like
we've tried to do that before.
yeah, it's kind of interesting. But yeah, certainly Tryndamere kind of doesn't fit. He just kind of is. He's like a random split pusher in the middle of a team fighting comp, which is sort of weird. And why is that weird, right? You know, again, well, I don't have it up here anymore, right? But you know, again, you know, grouped, split, you know, towers or jungle, right? You know, when we think about split pushing, right? And then we think about like team fighting, right? These are on diagonals, right? And so that's why this feels bad, right? Is because these are on diagonals. There's no part of that is overlapping, right? Anyway, so yeah, we've got a Tryndamere who can split push, and then 4 champions that can team fight. So, what do you think? What should we try to do in a vacuum?
It's kind of feels bad here because well, I feel like those 4 champions, those 4 champions with the exception of Tryndamere, you can't exactly create picks. Well, I guess you could with Rakan and like Xayah, but
we really don't have enough CC, right?
Yeah, you don't. So having Tryndamere, it's kind of yikes for the rest of the team to try and do something.
So you guys are bottom laners, right? Is that the case?
Yeah.
So let's say that you two are the last 2 picks of the composition, okay? And you see that you have Tryndamere, Mundo, and Katarina, right? You know, with your champion pools, right? What 2 champions would you ideally slot in here to give yourselves potentially clearer, easier to work towards win conditions? Bet you didn't expect that one, huh? Suddenly we're in draft mode.
I would pick a
Zach support.
Yeah, I was just say Zach support or Nautilus. Okay. Both of them can create picks and have CC. Or Leona, because Leona's also busted. But yeah.
I could play Varus or Ashe or Callista, I guess. Probably mainly Varus.
Those are going to give a little bit better. So why do you prefer Varus here? What does Varus do for you?
Well, I feel like his R is good at creating a team fight or pick.
Yeah.
So it's a good opener, I guess.
And so contrast that with Ashe for me, who, you know, has that same ability to create the pick with an ultimate. What's the difference between Ashe and Varus outside of their ultimates?
Well, I feel like Ashe depends on the enemy team a lot more.
How so?
Just personal preference for the way she plays in a team fight.
So she is potentially, because the Varus R can kind of hit multiple people and kind of, you know, it's, I believe it starts to slow people. Am I insane?
Yeah.
Does Varus R slow people when it's spreading to them? It doesn't, right?
It chains and then roots again.
Yeah, while they're chained but not rooted, does it actually slow them? Varus Wiki.
I think so. I don't know.
I'm gonna look because it could be either way. I know Morgana. I think when she has the tether up, it actually like does slow them. But Uh, no, it doesn't slow them. Okay, I didn't think so, but I wasn't 100% sure. So while the chains are good, so either both of them are just going to be able to like, throw out the R into one person and then slow people, right? So I actually feel like they're roughly equivalent in terms of like, are they going to die to a diver, right? They have pretty much the same tools actually, that being a hard CC ultimate and a slow on a basic ability. So what makes you feel like Varus is easier to position with and easier to play into?
I don't know. I think it's just personal preference, to be honest.
Could be.
So
when we,
I feel like when I play Ashe,
yeah,
I prefer to I don't know how to explain it. I prefer to run back, like kite back with Ashe in team fights. That's what I feel depends on the enemy champion as well.
Mm-hmm. And with Varus, you feel more comfortable running in?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I feel more comfortable with Varus's auto attacks, so it's easier to kite forward.
Uh-huh. Okay.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And I think that you've hit upon another really interesting chunk of how to think about team fights, right? We've already kind of talked about the properties of champions that are good at team fights, but that's another thing that you can think about when you think about team fighting is, are we a team fighting comp that generally wants to kite back, or are we a team fighting comp that generally wants to engage forward, right? And that can affect how you play out your macro, right? If you're a composition that really wants to be kiting back, generally what you're going to want to do is like bait objectives, right? You start going for an objective and force them to walk into you because you're going to finish the objective if they don't, right? Where if you're an engage composition, generally you'll want to do kind of the same thing. You'll start the objective to get them close enough, right? But instead of threatening to finish it, as soon as they get close enough, you're just looking for the engage, and then you actually look to chase them, right? As opposed to wait for them to engage, right? So when we look at the rest of the champions on this team, right? Tryndamere, Mundo, and Katarina, do these champions have a preference for moving forward or moving backward in a team fight?
I feel like Mundo and Tryndamere have to kind of go in as well as Katarina.
Yeah, all of them have to go in if they're going to be team fighting. A Tryndamere that's running away does literally nothing. Katarina that's running away does literally nothing. A Mundo that is running away throws cleavers, but that is about it. He doesn't do that much, right? So strong preference for moving forward in a team fight. So if you feel more comfortable moving forward on Varus as opposed to Ashe, it makes perfect sense why you would prefer Varus in this spot. Does that make sense?
But Ashe is also good at kiting forward.
She is. She totally is. But if
really.
that as a champion she is, but as a player, the way that you're comfortable playing the champions, this is like why you feel that preference, right? So,
I guess that's also why I would have said Callista.
Yeah, Callista's also really nice. So, and when we think about the champions that you listed for the support position, right? Like Leona, Nautilus, and Zac, right? Like those are definitely all champions that are like, we're going in. We're going in. You know what I mean? So, and all of them are tankier than the Rakan, which is really, really nice because, with just Mundo for frontline, it's kind of sketchy, right? I'll propose a rule of thumb, right? If you're going to be trying to team fight, I would strongly recommend that you have, at a minimum, 1.5 frontliners. A tank counts as 1 frontliner. A bruiser counts as half a frontliner. A support that is tanky counts as like half a frontliner, right? So when we look at like Mundo plus a tanky support, that's generally like 1.5 frontliners, and you're like generally okay. Tryndamere also counts as half a frontliner because of his ultimate and the fact that he can use that to be somewhat durable beyond what he actually can, tank with his base stats, right? So, so let's continue to kind of dive into this draft scenario here. So we've talked about Ashe, we've talked about Varus, and we've talked about Callista for the AD carry position. We've talked about Nautilus, we've talked about Zac, and we've talked about Leona for the support position. So, if we're wanting to team fight, right, Well, okay, so first off, I actually think it could just be whichever one you end up picking is like all. It may be that all 6 of those are actually fine, and they actually create a cohesive theme, and all of them are reasonable, and it ends up being that whatever you would feel better picking is going to depend on exactly what champions are on the enemy team, right? Like all of them are fine synergistically, and so the question is which is best into the matchups, right? So we'll kind of keep that in the back of our mind, right? This could be any of 3. This could be any of 3. Now let's take a look at the enemy composition, right? So here we've got Poppy, Echo, Fizz, Jin, and Janna. Whew, spicy one, right?
Yikes.
So what is this team composition best suited for? What's their primary win condition?
I feel like somewhat pick, mainly, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Who's off theme?
Poppy the most.
Yeah.
Poppy the most. Janna still kind of, right? Janna isn't great for going for picks. Janna is a champion that very much prefers to go in which direction? Does she want to move forward or back? Yeah, back. Like in every possible way backwards, okay? Like,
Yeah.
Janna moving forwards is, like, hysterical. It's, like, so funny.
Even a passive helps at the back.
Yeah, literally it doesn't do anything, right? So,
Yeah.
so Janna wants to move backwards. Jin is kind of agnostic, right? Like, he can move forward or back, and he's kind of bad at both. Fizz and Echo strongly prefer to go in / must. They don't do anything if you don't go in, right? And then Poppy is actually also kind of agnostic. She can kind of go in either direction, right? So, not great on the team fighting front, right? You got 3 people moving forward, and then kind of Janna kind of moving backwards, right? And so the teams immediately, as soon as the team fight starts, teams immediately separate and generally end up doing almost nothing, right?
Yeah.
When we look at the picking scenario, Jin actually supports picks pretty well because he's got like the semi-global ultimate, and his W is like so long range that he can actually help with the like CC portion of like setting stuff up. Echo and Fizz provide really, really good burst. Poppy is actually not as bad at picks as you might expect, amusingly enough. The fact that she can wall stun people and her relatively high base damages actually give her a decent amount of crowd control and a decent amount of burst. She actually functions in pick comps okay. Her
I
ultimate,
feel like
when used as a tap cast, can actually do a reasonable job of locking people down until Echo and Fizz can arrive. You had something?
I feel like they would have a good team comp for sieging and tower diving if they had a different top laner.
Sieging and tower diving. Okay. What are you seeing that says siege to you?
I feel like Fizz is very good at going in for if he can get a good ult, and the same with Jin and Janna, provide good
Echo.
follow up, and Echo obviously. But
So
it's very hard for the Poppy to follow.
Poppy.
yeah. So you're thinking of picks under tower. I'll say, is there a better way that you can generate picks? We actually talked about it earlier this session. Yeah. So how do you make that happen? How do you get people to go into the jungle?
You bait objectives or
Push.
vision control.
If you bait objectives, generally the entire enemy team is going to come. It's not going to be one person.
Yeah.
It's going to be all of them, right? So that's how you start team fights. If you want to start a pick, the way that you actually do it is by split pushing, right? You have a couple of people shoving down one lane, and then you have one person shoving down another, and then you got a picker sitting in the jungle in between them, right? So if you wanted to set up a pick here, what I would do is I would send the weaker of the two, Fizz or Echo, to a side lane. I would have Jin, Janna, and Poppy kind of sit as a really nice, disengagey, siegey, pushy kind of trio in mid lane, and then have the stronger of the two between Echo and Fizz sit in the jungle. And what that then does is it allows the the weaker of the two assassins to be in a side lane, and kind of somebody's going to have to answer them eventually, right? And then whoever it is that does answer them now is getting 2v1'd by an assassin duo, and that feels really tough to survive, right?
Yeah. So
that would be my course of action is look for picks through that, and if if Jin happens to be finished pushing mid lane at that particular time, he can kind of like step into the jungle and potentially even assist with the pick, right? Like if it happens to be like the Echo, right, who's doing the pick and the Fizz is doing the split pushing, right? Now let's think of it the other way. Actually, Echo's the better split pusher because he's got better wave clear, right? So Echo's in the side lane, Fizz is in the jungle looking for the pick, right? Fizz sharks somebody, and then during the shark animation, when it pops up, that gives Jin a free opportunity to land his W into Ring them. It's like really tough for them to survive that, right? So that I think is the scenario that speaks to me the most. I don't generally like sieging because none of these champions really have all that amazing poke. Jenna's poke is okay-ish. She can W and run out before the tower aggroes her. She can Q people, and it's like, okay, zone control. Jin W is fine poke. R is reasonable for walking up and doing a siege. But Fizz and Echo don't generally contribute all that much in a sieging scenario, unless they're so fed that, like you said, they're able to tower dive. And I find that you kind of already need to be ahead for that to be a viable strategy, right? And because those champions are really powerful in lane, they do often come out of the early game strong enough to go for that. But that would be something that I would only entertain once I see that they're already fed, right? At which point you can probably do almost anything and it'll work, right? Poppy as a sieging champion is actually okay if you had more poke, because she provides a really strong disengage, right? Her ultimate makes it really freaking hard to engage on your team, right? Like Poppy plus Janna plus Jin is actually the start of a really amazing siege composition. But Echo and Fizz are so off theme for that it just doesn't quite end up working. But kind of like you said,
it just feels to me like Fizz and Echo themselves aren't very good side lane, and you wouldn't really need to stop them, because I feel like they'd struggle to do anything impactful. You'd be forced to stop them.
I actually feel like Echo as a split pusher can be pretty good. You don't see a lot of Echoes go for split pushing, and I'm not exactly sure why. Because when you think about it, right, like when we go back to like the properties of champions that are like good as split pushers, right? Wave clear, right? Echo has this in spades. His Q is amazing wave clear, right? Speed or ability to take the tower, pretty darn good, right? Like his E, plus if he builds like a Lich Bane, like he can chunk towers like real freaking hard, real freaking fast, right? A way to escape, he's super slippery with his R. He's super slippery with his E. He can go all sorts of different places, right? And if he has Zanya's, that adds just like another dimension to the outplay power. And as far as 1v1 potential goes, he doesn't really have the sustained damage to match another dedicated split pusher, right? Like an Aurelia is going to be pretty hard for him to fight. Darius is going to be pretty hard for him to fight. But if they don't have one of those dedicated split pushers, if they're sending a mage or an AD carry to stop the split push, he can kill those very, very easily, right? So yes, he loses to dedicated split pushers in a split pushing situation. But there are in the event that the enemy doesn't have one, he can actually be pretty reasonable in this island. Do you agree with that? Does that make sense?
It would be like easier to create picks. So if he does have good split pushing, it can inevitably result in creating or more opportunity to create a pick when trying to stop the split push.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're in agreement here.
Somewhat. I don't know. I don't know. I still feel like that the champions are just bad together.
Yes, I agree. No, full stop. This is a terrible composition.
Yeah.
But the key to understanding win conditions and the key to doing well in solo queue is recognizing that you don't need to have a perfect composition to play something. You know, you need to be good at figuring out, what can I do with what I'm given here, right?
Yeah. I was just stuck on feeling like they're just bad at everything.
Oh god, yeah. No, I mean, like, this is a terrible composition. Like,
Yeah.
if the best thing that we can do is run this like janky low poke like disengaged trio in the mid lane and then try and split push and echo, like we're scraping the bottom of the barrel on the strategies here for sure. No, this is definitely not LCS worthy composition by any means. This is really bad. Very much, separate themes. Like, it's like Echo and Fizz are a composition, and Jin, Janna, and Poppy are a composition, and they happen to exist in the same team together, but they're like totally, completely different things, right? So,
Yeah.
Yes, it's very bad, but the best that you can do with this terrible composition is to essentially just kind of let those two groups play their own games. Echo and Fizz work together to kind of do like this like split push pick thing, right? And then Janna, Jin, and Poppy kind of work together to be like a 3-man skirmishing unit / sieging unit, right? And you just kind of you just let these two compositions within the composition play their own games on kind of on the same map, but generally separate from each other, right? And the thing to kind of understand is, depending on who's fed, right, you'll kind of be using the Echo Fizz hand of the composition or the Poppy Jin Janna hand of the composition more, right? So when we actually like scroll over here and look, right, we have an enormously fed Poppy for whatever reason. Echo and Fizz are doing terribly, and then Jin and Janna are doing like pretty reasonably each, right? So what does that say to us, right? How are we going to be trying to play to play the game? Which win condition are we going for?
Definitely played more towards the Poppy and Jin and John.
Yeah. So what are they generally good at? What are we going to be looking to do?
I would.
If we just ignore
Picks.
them, if we ignore the Echo and the Fizz, right, and we just have like Poppy, Jin, and Janna, what are Poppy, Jin, and Janna good at together?
Well, like poke, team fightish.
Yeah, I would say team fights actually.
Yeah.
Right? Pretty good engage with the Poppy going in and the Jin, right? Pretty reasonable, like backline damage, right? Like Janna actually with Comet does like a reasonable amount of damage, and a Janna shielded Jin is like he slaps,
Good disengage.
Yeah, really, really good disengage. Oh my god, good disengage.
Yeah.
Any diver that's trying to come in here is going to have a really hard time, right? They are never going to die, right? So if Jin, it's like they're never going to die, but they might just get like steamrolled in terms of stats, right? The problem with them as a team fight is that they generally kind of like lack damage. Like Jin is more burst than he is sustained already, and then Poppy and Janna just generally are low damage to begin with, right?
I also feel like they struggle to set it up.
Yes, they're kind of lacking on the engage. But check this out: Fizz, weirdly enough, can Shark as an engage.
Oh yeah.
It starts to come together. Oh, we can actually team Fizz as our engage, right? Like he's useful here, right? And then Echo and Fizz together add damage. It's not sustained damage. It's not the best, but it is damage, right?
And
so
Echo can also like pseudo tank.
Yeah, he can pseudo tank,
absorb
exactly. So he kind of, again, like we were talking about, he kind of counts halfway for a tank. So suddenly, once we have fed Poppy, Jin, and Janna, things start to come together and we start to see, now we can team fight. We can make this work. And again, is this a better team fight composition than a dedicated team fight composition? Absolutely not. This is terrible. This is a terrible team fight composition. But once Jin, Janna, and Poppy are fed, team fighting becomes the best win condition for the team because of the way that it influences what people are able to do. So, we've talked about each of these in isolation, each of these in terms of like who actually gets fed. Or no, we didn't talk about who gets fed on this team actually. But we talked about
with
subbing out.
those champs or with our champs.
Yeah, so we talked about subbing out for these champs. So now thinking about, okay, so now we actually like zoom out a little bit, right? So now we've got these 10, right? So we've got into Poppy, Echo, Fizz, Jinjana, we're playing Tryndamere, Mundo, Katarina, XX, right? So out of those 6 champions that you described, what 2 do you think are your favorite pairs into the enemy composition, and why? So you talked to me about Callista, Varus, and Ashe. Which of those do you feel like functions the best into their composition?
I feel like instantly I don't want to play Callista because of Poppy.
Yes, I think that's really reasonable.
Yeah, that's not very fun.
Nah,
to play that.
you get kind of crapped on. So
yeah.
So between Varus and Ashe, which do you like better?
It's quite a hard choice. I feel like. Huh? You can go.
Well, like if in your shoes, I would probably pick Varus. Like, but that's just my personal opinion.
Why is that?
Purely because I think Ashe is better for cutting back, whereas like Varus can, with Mundo and Katarina hard engaging, he can better follow up cutting forward.
Could I change? Could I change one and add a new champion?
Sure.
I think I could play Sivir, and that would be a lot more comfortable.
Oh, yeah,
so what does Sivir do?
Well, Sivir would stop me from being popped by Fizz and Echo, and then I would also allow my entire team to chase after the boss Jin and John.
And this is one of the beautiful things about Sivir, and when we think about win conditions and team fighting and team compositions, is that when you have a team that wants to team fight but has literally no crowd control, right? Sivir, amusingly enough, often ends up being the answer. Because of exactly the reason that we talked about before, right? If none of you have crowd control, just make everybody fast and we'll just chase them. A fast Mundo, a fast Tryndamere, a fast Katarina, that sounds awful. That sounds really scary, right? Yeah, like a fast Mundo, like coming in, like get me out. Like who cares about dashes? Who cares about tenacity? You can't itemize for it. You're just gonna get run down, right? So I actually love the Sivir pick. I think that's really creative. Nice. And if you're gonna play Sivir, who do you want with it?
Was this supposed to be?
Yeah.
Well, I would instantly not pick Zac.
Okay, why not?
Poppy's W just makes my E like nothing.
It's doomed. And Janna too. Janna can also interrupt Zac with the tornado.
Yeah,
That's also really
and I would also like if I had to pick Rakan, I couldn't pick Rakan. Otherwise, I would probably pick Nautilus and play specifically to engage or peel when like going in with the Sivir.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I totally agree. I think Sivir Nautilus is great.
I'll be comfortable with that.
Yeah, and I didn't quite understand when did you say that you would pick Rakan if you had the option to pick Rakan?
No, I wouldn't pick Rakan if I had the option.
Okay,
purely because of the Poppy and John as well.
Yes. No, I agree. I think Sivir Nautilus is really nice here, and it actually rounds it out pretty interestingly. Suddenly, Sivir enables everybody on the team to actually team fight. Nautilus actually provides a really nice way to start off the fight with a nice engage. It's generally, the fights then look like, Nautilus lands a hook on somebody, and then R's them, and then they die. And then you Sivir R to chase the rest of the team down after that person is dead. And like that becomes the win condition. Right? So, okay. So at this point, how are you feeling about identifying kind of what your win condition is, and thinking about that from like a compositional perspective? Are you feeling comfortable?
Pretty good. The only problem is applying to solo queue, especially with like Silva. I'm like, how do we get the teammates on the same page?
Aha. That is a very interesting question.
Like, what do you do?
How do you get teammates on the same page? So, I'm going to go ahead and say we should probably save that for next session. Right? Communication is a huge topic and a very important one. Shot calling is a very important and huge topic. And there's... it's saying the same thing, but like there's a lot to talk about there, right? Those are generally going to be your answers, though, right? You shot call. And sometimes you're going to present the correct course of action to your team, and they're going to be like, nah, don't feel like it. And you just have to live with it.
A lot more often than sometimes, to be honest.
Yeah, quite often.
I would say just try to pick champions that you like, what you think they like. Of the champions they play, like try to pick champions to match them, like
exactly.
and how they would play. But like that's kind of hard with Silver because some of them couldn't play champions properly.
It is difficult. It is difficult, and so you want to strike that balance, right? Of picking a champion that's good synergistically with your team and good into the enemy team, and also a champion that you're confident on and that you can actually carry with. Not just survive, but like carry with, right?
Yeah.
And this is
what are your thoughts on Rengar bot lane?
I mean,
believe it or not,
champion.
Looking at do it, Rengar Soroka, and he would come out like 10-0 every game.
Okay.
But I would come out like 0-6.
Okay. So
I just felt like asking that.
Here's what I'll say about that. Do it until it stops working. And when it stops working, try to figure out why it stopped working. Because in doing that, so we both know Rengar bottom lane isn't played at the top of the ladder, but that doesn't mean that it is an effective pick.
It was a boosting strategy.
Sure.
That Drew and Dua used.
Absolutely. I can totally believe that. It's really punishing, right? Like, if the enemy doesn't know how to play around it, so, we'll talk about, like, cheese picks, and the way that I'll talk about, like, a cheese pick, like Rengar, is it works up until the point that the enemy knows that you're going to do it and knows how to play around it, right? The strength in the strategy is that nobody's seen it before and no one has any idea how to play around it. Right? And if they don't know how to play around it, it can be one of the easiest wins that you'll ever see. But if they do know how to play around it, suddenly you are, like, actually completely useless.
Yeah.
Like, it does nothing, right? But that can be okay. Because if you're in Silver, no one is going to know how to play around it. And if you meet somebody that does, they're going to be like the one person out of the next like month of games that you play that will. You know what I mean? Like, you're just like, okay, that's fine. I'll take the loss. That's okay. The chance that I was going to hit somebody that didn't know was so high that it was still the right decision. Right?
Okay.
So do it until it stops working, and when it stops working, try to figure out why. Because when you figure out why, that is going to actually teach you something important about the game, right? And the lesson that you take out of that experience is going to be invaluable, right? In this case, I imagine like what you'll learn is like how to play against like aggressive melee bottom laners, right? Like, what is the counterplay to that, right? And I'm not going to go ahead and tell you. I'm going to have the ladder teach you, right? Keep doing it until somebody figures out how to make your life hell. And then, if you do decide to stop playing it, right? Now when somebody picks, I don't know, like Blitz Pantheon into you, you have a better idea of what to do. Whereas before you may have just been, totally caught with your pants down, no idea what to try. And assumably, if you're asking me about it, you had fun doing it, right? So, like,
I had a lot of fun.
you're gonna enjoy
A lot
the
of fun.
hell out of those games while you're doing it.
I went like 30-5 or something.
Okay.
We still
Sure.
lost the game.
Yeah, no, that
Sure,
sounds exactly like a Rengar bottom lane to me. 30 kills
That's
deep,
fun.
still loses. That's exactly what it sounds like to me. Yeah,
It was kinda my
not
fault,
surprised
but
in
it
the
was fun.
slightest. Yeah. Mhm. Okay, so here, pop quiz. If you're a really fed Rengar, what's your win condition?
Skirmish.
Picks the skirmishes.
Skirmish.
How do you make that happen?
Try to catch them out of position or get someone
rush
bait.
out.
How do you pick people? You try to pick them. That's not it. What do you actually do? We talked about it today.
Bait.
Twice.
Bait split push.
There you go. That's what I'm looking for. Split push. You split push. You split push. That is how you make picks. You split push. Good. Excellent. Okay. So, next time we can talk about. We can kind of open up with talking a little bit about shot calling and how to wrangle your teammates. But you already have some decent ideas, right? You know. It's probably going to be a similar sort of session to today where, like, you know, a lot of the stuff that I say, like, you already know, but, like, you're maybe not conscious of it, right? So, you know, start thinking, you know, what does good shot calling look like, right? What does good communication look like with your team? How do you actually get people to follow along with what you want to do? One really excellent way to get people to follow along with what you want to do is to be right. If you shot call the incorrect win condition and the enemy and your team knows it, and they know that you're wrong, they will literally never follow your call. 0% of the time will they follow your call. You have to be right. If you are not right, they will never follow it. If you are right, then there is a chance that they will follow it. It is not 100%. It is just a chance. And as long as you can look at what you said and what you pinged, and be confident that it was correct, and be confident that you communicated it efficiently and clearly, that's all you need to do, right? Give them the opportunity to make the right choice, the highest chance, and from there, you can rest easy knowing that you've done all you can. Okay?
Yeah.
You know. So.
One more question. This is related to the book, Mental Game of Poker.
Oh, okay, sure.
So like, I think it's the adult learning method with going from unconscious incompetence
Yes.
to unconscious competence.
Yes.
In this situation, like, would this be going from conscious competence to unconscious competence by identifying the clear and cut different types of comps and recognizing them and trying to get it like engraved in your brain to pick better champions?
Okay. So what you don't know is that there's actually a second learning model that he presents in the second book, which he calls the zone learning model. Okay. Oh. And I'll just kind of briefly introduce you to that because I think that's actually more applicable here. So, have you ever heard of a psychology study called the Iowa Gambling Task before? I don't expect that you have, but just checking. Okay, so the way that worked was they got a bunch of people together, okay, and they for each person they would set them in front of like 2 decks of cards, or I think it was actually 4 decks of cards, and they would say like, okay, like you have a fake bankroll, right, for like $1,000, okay, and on each of these cards there are, you know, positive or negative dollar amounts, right, and so your only job is to pick cards from whatever of the 4 decks you feel like, and that then influences your bankroll, right? And what they don't tell you is that 2 of the decks have generally high dollar amounts and generally negative values, right? So big swings, but on average you're losing money, right? And then 2 of the other decks have generally small dollar amounts, but generally positive values, right? Generally, you're going to gain money, right?
Yeah.
So, what they found was that by 20 cards in, after having picked just 20 cards, they had people hooked up to like machines that could measure like physical stress levels, right? And they started seeing like minuscule stress responses on like tiny amounts of sweat on like the tips of the skin, on the like tips of the fingers, and like various other places, right? Like the body started having a stress response when picking from the high variance, low value decks by just 20 cards deep. When they asked the participants, have you devised a strategy yet for picking cards from these decks? They're like, no. What are you talking about? Absolutely not. No idea, right? They're not even conscious that their body is having this reaction. By about 80 cards deep, people start to feel like they have a hunch. They're like, I think there's something here. There's something to do with the decks. They're like different in some way, but I can't quite put my finger on what it is. But I know that there is a pattern here somewhere, right? Then by about 90 cards in, that's about when they start to actually be able to consciously explain, this deck is this way, this deck is this way, my strategy is this, right? The same sorts of things will happen in League, right? You'll go through a period where you're just playing and your body is starting to develop responses to different patterns, but you aren't even aware of it. It's totally unconscious, right? Then you will start to enter a period where you have a hunch, right? You have some notion that there's something here, but you're not exactly sure what it is, right? Or you're not exactly able to explain it, right? Then, after reflecting on your experiences, you eventually get to a point where you can explain what it is. And you come up with a concept to kind of explain what it is.
Yeah.
Right? So, what I think probably has happened here is, the two of you, I don't know whether you've ever watched any other, training videos or come across anybody else that talks about like win conditions in this way, right? But, if you have, then the moment that you encountered those things would have been the moment that you went from unconscious incompetence, stage 1, to conscious incompetence, stage 2. That was the moment that you learned about it and started saying, oh, I should probably get better at this, right? Then as you but the alternative is you never did. You never found anybody that talked about this stuff, and you just kind of played the game. And if you just played the game and started thinking picking different champions in different situations seems to make sense, and I'm starting to realize that there's certain positions on the map that are better and worse for different champions, right? That would be more like you had something that was in what he'll call zone competence, right? Where you just kind of you were doing it, but you couldn't explain why. You were just I know that this is correct, but I mean, if you ask me why,
oh, okay, yeah,
right?
Yeah.
That's what he calls zone competence, right? And the thing that's kind of sketchy about this, right, is that it's actually these two models work together in the last two stages, right? I'll go ahead and clear this out. Where's the clear canvas? There we go. So it's actually like a Y, right? So it's zone competence, right? And then it's conceptual competence, and then it's conscious competence and unconscious competence, right? And these are shared between the two models. Those are the last two steps for both model. But then this is unconscious incompetence and then conscious incompetence, right? And so you can you can go up either branch of this model. So you tell me actually. Had you heard of team compositions before? Was that something that you were already kind of aware of, and the ideas of properties of champions? Was that something that you were consciously aware of before? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, just yeah.
Yeah, like you like roughly knew that it existed. Okay, so in that case, yeah, I think it makes more sense to talk about the adult learning model then, right? So, you know, before you had heard of them, you were in an unconscious incompetence, right? And it may be too that, even after you heard of it, maybe you didn't really understand like why it was important or like how it would help you, right? And that would still qualify as unconscious incompetence, right? There's no motivation to actually get better at it and learn it, right? So, um, at some point though, you actually kind of like relatively well learned how to do it, right? And so you learned about it, then you like started to practice it, right? And you got to the point where you can kind of do it, but if you're not paying attention, you probably still do it badly, right? And that's what conscious competence is if you're not paying attention, you're not going to worry about it, right? But if you are paying attention, you can do it correctly, and that's where I believe that you are now, right? Is I believe that you are now
Yeah.
here in conscious competence. And as you continue to practice doing this, right, you go into your games and you consciously say, like, okay, like, what are our win conditions? What should I pick? Like these sorts of questions, right? As you continue to do these sorts of things, that is going to familiarize this to the point where eventually you'll be able to do something like this, right? Where you just like look at a composition, right? Like I'll pull up this and I'll be like, okay, it's like a skirmishy team fighty versus like pick team fighting, right? Maybe split push with Garen, right? And like you can just like immediately you just look at the champion portraits and you just get like an intuition. You know what I mean? Like I didn't sit here and think about like
Yeah.
what are the abilities of these champions. I just looked at all 5 of the portraits and was like, yeah, it's like my intuition of what this is, right? Eventually you'll get there. And the way that you get there is by doing it consciously over and over and over and over again, right? And getting those repetitions.
Just getting better at it.
Yeah.
It's like the same with learning a champion. So
Exactly. Yes.
combos.
Oh, yeah.
Any skill is going to progress through those 4 stages, right? And I shouldn't even use this. I should just pull up the nice graphic that I made. So this one here, this is the graphic, right?
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So there we go. So like first your consciousness gets raised, but you're still kind of bad. Like the color represents your skill, and the line represents like how aware of it you are, right? And then this is like the learning process, right? So like first you're totally unaware, and then you like learn a little more. Oh, like okay, here's where you decide like, oh, actually I'm gonna be like paying attention to this and working on it, right? And then you start off bad, then you get better, 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 then you stop getting better. You're actually as good as you're gonna be, right? But then it starts to take less and less and less and less and less effort to actually do it, until it happens totally unconsciously, and it's actually harder to do it wrong than it is to do it right, because it's so familiar to do it correctly, right?
Yeah.
And that's where you're eventually looking to end up, right? And this process, right, the color change, the getting better at it, this is a matter of doing exactly what we did today. It's a matter of studying it, right? You think deeply about it, you make new models for how you're supposed to do this, what you're supposed to think about, what factors am I supposed to pay attention to. The question is always, what is correct, right? But then once you hit this line, once you're in trying to get it to totally unconscious competence, that then becomes less about what is correct, because what is correct is already known. It's about, am I correct? You do this, right? You figure out, okay, like here's my win conditions, and then you play the game, and then you review the game, and you look at it, and you say, okay, was I actually able to correctly identify the best win conditions, do I think, right? Was I correct? Did I come up with the right answer in the moment, right? And that's the question that you have to be answering to complete the very last steps of conscious competence and start moving into unconscious competence.
Yeah.
Through practice. Make sense?
Yeah.
So what if for like certain things we struggle to remain conscious about needing to improve them in the game? Like, if I want to work on my CS, and like I just zone out while I'm playing. Think about it.
The key
How would I go about fixing that?
is drilling and isolation. The key is finding a way to create a smaller, simpler version of the game in which you can still realistically practice that skill, and then doing that, which should be significantly less overwhelming. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like if you have a CS, if you have problems with CS, go into a custom game, CS versus a bot. A lot less pressure going to be put on you from a bot than from a silver player, right? So, that would be what you would be looking to do. How do you construct those drills? How do you know whether they're actually helping you? That can be another topic that we talk about next time. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay. So, feeling good? Feeling ready to take on the week?
Mm-hmm. Feeling ready to play some
Yeah.
solo queue right after
I'm
this.
gonna
Let's
play this. Yeah.
go.
Same.
Win 'em! That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it was great working with you guys. We can go ahead and handle payment after I turn off the stream. But yeah.
Yeah.
Any final questions? Any final thoughts on the session?
I had one. I did have one. But
Okay.
I can't remember it now. So is it fine if I like send a message in the group
Yeah.
chat later?
Sure. That works.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's annoying me. It was right there.
Great.
But I can't think of it anymore.
All right. Well, thanks very much to both of you, and I'm sure we can set up another session soon. And in the meantime, if I do any more coaching or anything, I'll let you know, and I'll paste the stream link and everything. You guys can follow along all that.
Cool.
Yeah. Have a great time. I look forward to your success stories. So.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good one, guys. I'll catch you later.
Okay. Cheers.
Peace.